few words about Kantian ethics. The really root of Kantian ethics that one has to understand is the idea of a will, how one acts through their free will. So if you think about the word will, if I will something to be done, take the idea of I really had the will to exercise this year, okay? And when we say a statement like that, we mean two things by will. We mean we have an intention, we really, really, really want to, okay? And that's matched by a kind of actions. So not only is an intention like we dream about exercising a lot or we dream about going to the gym, but we also write out a schedule. We implement practical things in order to get that job done. When we talk about people who have made their millions, right, through pure will, that's the idea we're trying to say. You know, that's the difference between people who dream or just want to make millions and people who have the will to make millions, right? They join, not only that they have that desire, they have that dream, they join that with a kind of practical application, okay? So that's will. Kant starts with the idea that we all have free will. Now, this point can be argued, but I would say the basis of most Western philosophical ideas is that humans are born with free will. Free will means that you really have the freedom to make any choices you want. You really have the freedom to think anything you want, to intend anything you want, to desire anything you want. What's interesting about the human species is that above all other species, we actually, with pure will, through our free will, can take our own lives, right? Suicide. Suicide is the great example of how humans can exercise free will above and beyond instinct, above and beyond that kind of natural survival instinct that all species have, even humans. We can go against that. And I'm not just talking about me jumping out the window here. Also, we can stop eating. Now, a species that through pure will can stop eating it is one of the proofs that humans have free will. Again, it can be argued. Humans have free will. Kant says that is really the one thing that we can control, that we can control our intentions, we can control our desires, which are, if we want to see them through, are met by practical application. So Kant would say that you throw me in a room, a dark room, a 4x4 room, you lock me up for the rest of my life. You can take away my family, you can take away my riches, you can take away my legs, you can take away everything, but you cannot take away my will. I will always have that intentionality that you cannot take away. So therefore, Kant says, if you want a theory of ethics, base it on the one thing that we can control. Since the idea is that morality is all about our control. We certainly don't want our morality, whether we're moral or immoral, judged by other people's judgments or other people's decisions or other people's actions, right? We want our morality judged purely on our own actions. And really the only action, the only thing that humans can do purely freely, totally of their own choice, is that they can have that intentionality. Okay, there's the basis. Kant says everything about morality has got to be based on that will. And he says, therefore, if you want to be a good person, if you want to live a moral life, then all you have to do, sounds very easy, is have good will towards others. In other words, you have to intend other people well. Now, again, if we apply that original definition of will to Kant's idea, that means not only do you have to just kind of wish that your neighbor did all right and wish that your neighbor was okay, but you also have to take practical steps to make sure that your neighbor is okay. Okay? So, Kant's basic idea boils down to what we hear in the Christmas carols. Have goodwill toward human beings. Intend people well. Have good intentions, but not the kind of intentions which pave the road to hell, right? Good intentions in the sense that have good intentions, good desire towards others, but also meet them with practical steps. Okay, now, again, very simple, have goodwill towards men. Let's back it up a little bit and remember that Kant is a deontological ethical theory, that Kant believes in moral absolutes, that Kant does not believe, he is against any kind of consequentialist ethics. He says that an action should be based on our intention alone, and it should not be based necessarily on what the consequences are. So certainly, if we have good intent for our neighbor, we're not going to do some action which will consequentially, or at least that we have knowledge that the consequences will be bad. But Kant also says that if bad things come from our good intent towards others, then that's okay. That doesn't change the fact that it was a very moral act. On the other side of the coin, of course, you don't do an action just because you know it'll bring about good consequences. In other words, you don't go against your goodwill towards other just because you know it'll bring around good consequences. Okay, so we said, Kant said, goodwill towards others, and you have done a good act. Now, that's tough. It sounds easy, but of course it isn't, because what does that mean? So Kant gives two kind of rules to follow, two categorical imperatives, he says. Act as if the maxim of your actions were to become universal. That sounds very fancy. Basically, it's saying that for all your actions, think about what would happen is if everybody would do that. And a good example that he brings about is lying. So we talked about lying for consequentialist reasons. Kant would say, now think about that. What if suddenly you said that lying was okay if any particular person thought that the consequences would be okay? In other words, the maxim, the rule behind the fact that you might lie is that lying is, on some cases, okay. Kant said, imagine a world where suddenly lying was okay, that there was no prohibition about lying. What would that world look like? Well, it'd be irrational, right? Every time you heard a promise, you would kind of expect that that promise might not be kept, right? There'd be no such thing as contracts. There'd be no such thing as property. There'd be an exchange between human beings which nobody from one day to the next would know whether it was real or not, right? In other words, if everybody's doing it, then the world falls apart. Second categorical imperative, if we want to have goodwill towards others, do not treat others as a means to an end. Now, what does that mean? That means basically do not use people, or do not only use people, okay? So, for instance, I go into my local Starbucks, right? I talk to my baristas, and I'm ordering a coffee. Kant would say, when you order that coffee, yes, you can use those people because they're giving you your fix for the day, right? But don't just treat those people as a means to your caffeine fix. Appreciate them as human beings. Have goodwill toward them. Now, let me tell you, this is very hard to do just on a day-to-day basis. I'm driving down the highway, the freeway. I've got all these freaking idiots who are trying to cut into me or slowing down or in the wrong lane, right? I am not thinking about these people as people. I'm thinking these people are in my way. I need to get to work on time. There's my ends. And these people are just a means to my ends. And if they're a good means to my end, they get the hell out of the way and let me drive to work, right? Kant says, no, wrong. You have a waitress or a waiter, and the waitress is late, and she seems kind of grumpy, and she's not getting your food. When the food comes out, it's wrong, and you get grumpy at her, right? Kant says, wrong. You've got to treat everybody with goodwill, with good intentions. And don't just treat them as a means to an end. Usually our end is happiness, as Aristotle would say, right? So I want to get to work on time, and I like people who function as a good means to that end. I want my coffee in the morning, so I like baristas who are a good means to that end. Kant says you got to back that up. You got to back that up and treat people like human beings, even though they're giving you a means to an end, even though that they're there to be of service to you. Anyway, there's Kant for you in a nutshell. Good luck.